we are. I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next, the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am joined by recording engineer, producer, and musician Martin Bisi, whose Brooklyn recording studio, BC Studio, celebrates its 45th year this year, which in itself is a big news story, but that is not the only event of note this year for Martin Bisi, because as well as all of his work as a recording engineer, Martin Bisi is releasing his latest solo record, Dancing on the Power Lines, this very Friday. And that, as well as the history of Martin's music making projects, is largely what we're talking about today. If you are familiar with Martin and his work, you will be aware that he has worked with many, many notable names. And just for me personally, all the work he's done with Swans, with Sonic Youth, having worked with Henry Rollins as well, is incredibly exciting. And I could spend hours, if I had the opportunity, talking with him about stories regarding all the different production work that he's done. In fact, you may notice that in this interview, there are occasional references to having spoken with each other before. So a few weeks ago, I spoke with Martin for a different project, not for the podcast, something that will be in written form. And it's not been published yet, so I can't say what it is. But if you're aware of anything that I'm doing apart from this podcast, you should be able to take a pretty good guess at what that conversation relates to. But although Martin, I think, is a limitless well of fascinating stories from his time as a producer, I thought that it would be a less well-told story, but a story worth telling, to dive into his own music making history. You can go to my website, tomosmansounds.com, for my music. I am, after going in a little bit of creative hibernation, springing forth and getting back involved in some of the different projects that I've started and then sort of let sit in the background. But hopefully, in the not too distant future, I will have some of my own music to promote. Again, beyond all of that, links in the description for the record, for following Martin, BC Studio, Dancing on the Power Lines, Martin Bisi. Take it away.
Slow drum beat is a heartbeat. Slow drum beat is a heartbeat. A projection, which is great for the brain.
You are, I think this is the same place that you joined me from last time. So this is in BC Studio.
No, this is actually the public area of the building.
Okay.
Which for all the like niceties that have been added to my building, and I always try to coyly tell the building manager, landlord, that I hope it's not increasing my rent. Because I don't actually need any of it. Actually, this having a public area that's outside the workspace is cool. I don't need I mean, there's all these there's like plants. I don't need plants. I mean, it's super nice, and people, oh, this is so nice. It's like, can we just focus on making records? I just don't need it. I'm actually a little suspicious of this sort of like blending of lifestyle and work.
Yeah.
Kind of it's new. I mean, it's funny because I've been a little more comfortable lately. I think actually it's funny. I think I have a lot in common with I was going to say Jay-Z, Gen Z, maybe not so much with Jay-Z, but Gen Z that because Gen Z seems, at least the ones I know, seem they seem pretty aware or more likely to think that some stuff was better in the old days, like pre-internet, pre-hyper-gentrification.
I was just going to ask you whether your suspicion was connected to a sense of gentrification.
Yeah, I mean, all of that. I mean, also, I also came from a generation. It's funny because I saw Talia Zedek from Live Skull.
Yeah, I've interviewed her.
Yeah, I saw her a few years ago, and then somehow she just said, I hadn't seen her in a while, and she somehow, I said, how you doing? And then she said something like people like she and I have more of a, I forget how she put it, but I knew what she meant. And it's not ambition. and I don't even like using the word career. Like I recoil a little at thinking that I have a career. But she said just kind of this drive to do things or to make things happen, you know. And she was saying compared to young people that have maybe, and I share a bit of that fatalism actually, you know. But on the other hand, back particularly I mean, I'm older than Talia, I'm pretty sure, but back then, I mean, it was also a little bit that Gen X still was a little bit left over from baby boomer 60s, you know, where there was a sort of idealism. And you kind of, actually, I felt like I was quite influenced by the 60s because I witnessed it. I remember the streets of the West Village in Manhattan, you know, in like 1968 and 69. I remember so-called hippies, you know, like on the street, interacting with them basically. And so as a punk, basically, and sort of surrounded by a lot of hippie hating, because there's a lot of like, oh, you know, fuck the hippies. I was actually a little sympathetic, but whatever, the hippies. I mean, they were a lot like us in a way, and Legs McNeil is even, you know, the Please Kill Me punk author, pretty much conceded. You know, the hippies actually, in retrospect, had more in common with us than we gave it credit at the time. Like, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. It's like counterculture. It's like collectivist, all this kind of stuff. I mean, what the sounds are a little different. Yeah. So with Talia, when she was saying, you know, we got that drive of the previous era, you know, where and I'm kind of, there was, you know, there was definitely a sense of that. Like I think I remember Bill Laswell. There was always that. It was like he would say do shit. You know, there would be like, yeah, oh that guy, yeah, let's talk to him. Yeah, he does shit. Like or like, and it's like that was vague. It's like, okay, cool. I don't know what he's doing.
But he's doing something.
He's doing something. So there was a little more of a, you know, I mean, I guess there's a lot of ambition that's happening, you know, around us, you know, with young people. But I mean, maybe amongst, or it maybe seems a little more toxic also, influencers, this kind of stuff.
Yeah. You mentioned fatalism, and something I was going to ask you relating to the forthcoming record, Dancing on the Power Lines. In the notes that you gave me before about some of the tracks, you brought up how in the second to last and the last track, there was this thematic notion of a calamity, both calamities in the past but the bigger calamity to come. So I was wondering, because I have been absorbing all of your music, so I am very much like soaked in your music throughout the years and all the different sort of sounds and sonic aspects of it, and also as well, just like the way that the tone has changed from record to record. And I was thinking that I was wondering for you with the latest record, do you think that there's kind of like a sense of foreboding that goes through the whole record? Because it is quite a dark record.
Yeah, it's funny because people have mentioned that to me, the darkness. I mean, the one thing I feel particularly on the opening track and some other tracks, it felt like, because I've been trying to examine like the last three releases, how they differ. And the reason I think about that quite a bit is because my current set, I still don't want to let go of the old material. So my current set, the last couple of live shows I did, really has two songs from each of the last three records. And I was like trying to analyze with the band. Well, it's funny because there's really different vibe here. So Feral Myths, it's a lot of drama, like emotional drama. It was also sort of pandemic informed. Also, a lot of this New York City became pretty feral. I mean, it was actually a phenomenal vindication for me with the sort of George Floyd, you know, uprising basically in New York City. And it was not just the politics of it, but just this sense that New York City was less under control. And I thought I'd never see that again. New York City, it felt so vindicated. I'd never see that side of New York again where things were out of control. There was also less stuff to do. There was, you know, like the pandemic, lockdown, so people were more free. Stuff would happen outside. Literally, there was times I'd sit in this room listening to see if I could hear like a march, like a political march, because they'd be just crisscrossing the city like, all the time. Go up, I think there's one. Okay, maybe over here on Fourth Avenue. Boom, run over, catch up, march with them for a little while. You know, chant. So it was. So there was this drama, that I felt like emotional drama that I wanted to capture in Feral Mist. And then the next one, which was an EP, and actually it's deliberately an EP because I think it just didn't warrant, friggin' 10 songs. There's more humor.
Yeah, I thought that it seems lighter than Feral Myths and Solstice as well, like both sonically and like there's a more kind of like playfulness, I thought, on your Ultimate Urban Fantasy.
Yeah, and I felt like I want to do this, and I have funny commentary to make. In fact, it's funny. The more direct the commentary, sometimes the more direct the political or social political commentary, the more some humor or irony kind of works. So they're like a fanciful new neighborhood, a Williamsburg in orbit, right? And when's was Williamsburg being like the hipster neighborhood, the sort of gold standard for gentrification? Was Williamsburg, Brooklyn, I think. I think globally, people, when they think of like gentrification and what it did to music, they go, because I've been in towns in other parts of the world, and we're walking through the town, and the person who's hosting you in whatever town will go to a neighborhood and goes, oh, by the way, this neighborhood, this is sort of like what your Williamsburg is and was. So that's often like this reference point. So yeah, Williamsburg in the Sky. That was that was the title, your ultimate urban fantasy. Very ironic. And then this latest one, I kind of thought it had a lot to do with drive. Rhythmic drive. Like it seemed like more about like a rhythm, and part of it is how it was made, because all the guitar parts were all loops. It was very, very strange, except for the last song. It's funny because the last song resonates with a lot of people, the anarcho-nihilist one, and it almost didn't make it on the record. Classic, the one that I wasn't even sure I should even do. That's a lot of people's favorite. So that always happens. That happens to everyone, I think. But yeah, also it's worth noting I didn't write. Half the lyrics on the record were written by Nora Almeida, who's sort of who's a collaborator. We were I'm proud of that. I thought it was a great process for me to kind of say, because I was getting this sort of a little bit of writer's block, and it wasn't musical, it's freaking lyrics, and so to work with like a poet, it's like you can see these people. I've worked with I've worked with Iggy Pop and what's the guy in Black Flag or whatever it is?
Henry Rollins.
Henry Rollins. He was in the studio for some sessions for his project Wartime.
Oh, with Andrew Weiss.
Exactly. It was like a single that was sort of at the cusp of him getting signed for Rollins' band. So I'm accustomed to being around, or Michael Jarrah. I mean, these are writers. They like write books. They're always writing. Rollins would, during downtime at the studio every day for I don't know, an hour and a half, writing. There was a problem. Oh fuck, we have this verse, or maybe we're adding a verse. Maybe there's a break. Maybe we need voice here. Give me a sec. Okay. All right. I think this fits in. Let me work it in a little. So that kind of stuff. So working with a lyricist, it's like that sort of thing. Where someone comes up with ideas. So it was Nora's. Somewhere in one of her poems was dancing on the power lines, and it had to do with birds actually. But then I was like, oh, I'm seeing something there, And I think people are related. It's funny because I've, but I mean, there is a total fatalism on the record. I mean, literally, I'm communicating that it's over. I mean, that's really what I'm saying in the last two. So I should maybe address that first, which is the one that's the Last Conquest.
That's actually my favorite song, by the way.
Oh, cool! Thank you, because that's lyrically a total chaos. I wrote those lyrics. So that's good to hear. That's good to know that I should sometimes write my own lyrics. That one, because I'm very conscious of the invasion of the Americas and what this land is, and that I'm governed by European systems, and that I speak three languages. I only speak European languages, and reality check. This isn't Europe. Never has been Europe. Never will be Europe, and that's where we're at. Then I'm confronted with things occasionally that I'm very suspicious of people claiming decolonization. You're seeing all these institutions, museums. We're decolonizing, And I'm like, I don't know. You got that's like a friggin' grain of salt in a friggin' ocean. And I'm not ready to like break open the champagne because they move around some exhibits and include some indigenous artists. All welcome, but still, I mean, it's a little bit of a bold. Almost like a narcissism, you know. So I'm a little suspicious. I'm like, you really want to impress me of decolonizing? You'd self-abolish. Then I'm not saying anyone should leave the United States. I'm just saying, it's just the reality, and also just during the pandemic, trying to speak to some people that were skeptical of the pandemic, and I said it's not a question of interpreting science. I'm just looking at history. Pandemics are humanity's number one enemy, and look at this area that we're here was depopulated because of pandemics. And you can even see Native American tribes in the Dakotas, as soon as they said, European pandemic on the horizon, they were the first ones. They were like, that's it. Shut the borders of their reservations. I mean, they did it extremely seriously because they'd already been through like that 50 to 90% death rate from previous pandemics. But anyway, so I look at this calamity of the Americas as just massive. Really, the destruction of the Americas, the destruction of its land, it's visible, destruction of its land and its peoples. So I'm just aware of that, and I like talking about it because I think it just, I mean, there's an aspect that seems a little ignored. So I guess the premise of that song is because society, Western civilization and Eastern civilization, for that matter, have continued. I still remember 1492 as an awful year, and I think there's one more coming. I don't know what it'll be, but I was kind of putting it as not so much a conquest, but that's why I use the word conquest. It's like some massive, and we only get one more, and that leads to the closing track, which is the Anarcho-Nihilist, which is now, interestingly enough, how I close my live sets. Is I stand at the front of the stage with a bullhorn and read that same thing. I usually hold something out like I'm reading like a proclamation, and like Romans, hear me, this kind of thing, right? And I mean, performatively, I think that kind of works. And sometimes when I talk to people about what I'm saying with the anarcho-nihilist thing, and then it's like all this is being abolished and all that, it's like, there might be hope after what I think happens, which is the civilizational collapse, which I think will happen, climate-driven. I think it's a couple centuries away, frankly. I mean, or whatever. Maybe it's even too pessimistic. I don't know. Maybe it's half a millennium. Probably a couple centuries. Civilizational, systematic, collapse. Internet. Imagine just the internet going out, right? And so coastal cities, all where a lot of the power is. And so I kind of said, if this happens, I might be that guy, proclaiming all that. But honestly, you don't want that guy. So that's the other side of it. It's like, it's a little bit of a warning. That sounds pretty negative. Yeah, we should be careful because that's the guy you might be getting. So watch it there. Another thing I think it's worth mentioning on the theme of the title of Dancing on the Power Lines is I was struggling with this idea of joy. I was kind of not getting it. I'm always a little lost during Pride Week. And I was talking to, and I'm open about this, and I'm like, explain to me again what we're supposed to be so happy about. And then I'm hearing stuff of radical joy, and I'm happy to announce I finally get it. And it happened one day one night, very late night in Berlin, with some friends of mine. I somehow just got it, and that's what's behind the Dancing on the Power Lines. That I'm all about all kinds of political action, and I always knew that that's some sort of form of, like for instance, just even to relate, like with Occupy Wall Street, I was all about the little like puppet theaters for children, that was relatable. So. So I'm all about doing it in different ways. And I kind of realized also like eating, like I was all about the people's kitchen. I was like, well, we got to feed people, we got to be strong and come around food. And that's tradition. That's in our human nature. So I finally got dancing I got the dancing, and I got the joy as a sort of like strengthening, and also as a as a show of defiance and maybe messaging to the other side. We're unified, and we feel we have the upper hand. And so this dancing on the power line. And so I'm sorry, I cut off one of your questions.
No, not at all. Not at all. I was wondering from the point of view of what you were talking about there with the sort of European colonial history and, you know, the sort of historical awareness and reference points that are in the latest album. I haven't listened to all of it because I didn't realize, I mean, I've listened to all the latest album, but I haven't listened to your first album all the way through because I was looking first of all at everything you had online and I thought like, oh, okay, your first album was Siren of the Apocalypse. I realized that's incorrect because actually you had two albums way before that. And so I only briefly listened to bits and pieces of them. But the very first album that you had, Creole Mass, I was wondering what the kind of, well, I mean, I think even that one and the second one as well, the All Will Be One, I figure there are certain kind of cultural, political, ethnic comments that are being made on those two albums. But I'm kind of wondering from you, like, what are they about, essentially?
Thanks. Yeah, that's very true. So Creole Mask, which now I have, which might not be the artwork I would do now. I have a mask, which is like a Pueblo Southwest, Southwestern Native American, Pueblo Native Americans, like Hopi. I think it's a rendition of a Hopi mask. Yeah. Now, I mean, I felt that as an homage, to Native Americans. And then there's some Native American, there's like eagle feathers on the cover of All Will Be One. By the way, All Will Be One, WON, a deliberate entendre, a double entendre there with unity and winning. I think there's two things. It is kind of funny because right now there's a real taboo against like fake Indians, right? Like people claiming Native American ancestry that don't really have it, or there's no real proof. It's just something that's been passed down in their lore, in their family lore. Interestingly enough, I think that's really an Anglo thing. Amongst Spanish speakers, I like reminding people, as I come from a Spanish-speaking, family and household. So I'm Hispanic. It's the opposite. I mean, if there's a bit of Native American ancestry there, they usually hide it and lie to you and tell you, oh, don't listen to the lore or something. And then with the Anglos, it's a little funny because they're like, oh, well, we're part Cherokee or something like that, right?
Like Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, and I actually think she is part something. I mean, her family's from Oklahoma, which used to be Indian territory. Why would it be so surprising? And the largest tribe that was removed to Indian territory was the Cherokee. Not a crazy assumption on her part, but that said, I'm sympathetic to fake Indians. I kind of get it. Like since I don't recognize the legitimacy or the right of being of the United States or any nation states in the Americas. Why? Based on what? Based on genocide, based on ethnic cleansing. So I don't recognize this legitimacy. And Native American tribes, states, all that. That's realer for sure. By tens of thousands of years more real. And I'm Native American. I work with Laura Ortman. She doesn't really like her Native American identity talked about all the time, but she's Apache, and we're recorded some records with her. So I have an affinity there. And also the reason I deal with a lot of Native Americans is I think I just know a lot of Native American history. I like history anytime I'm anywhere. I was in Sweden last year, really curious. Oh, well, what is this? I asked a lot of historical questions trying to understand. So I really try to always understand the roots of places. And here, of course, even just that, I'm going to be informed, want to be informed. And also this hankering for finding some other kind of root than this modern civilization around me. So I think in my early adulthood, which is sort of a coming of age, like with Creole Mass, which came out in 1989, and obviously I'd been in the works for a few years prior to that, I was like, first of all, I was a little more concerned about identity in a way that I am not now. So that's why there's there's a big gap of my like having a lot of Native American type of stuff in the first two records, and then nothing, and then just more humor, and then maybe now it's reemerging slightly, but not as far as like not in the sense of identity. But it's worth noting that when the studio changed names between somewhere in the mid '80s, when me and Bill Laswell split apart, it went from OAO, Operation All Out, which was taken from a William Burroughs book, actually. And it went to BC Studio, BC, and everyone was like, and I was like trying to explain, like before Christ, and everyone was like, "Oh, that's so cool," but I was not really thinking of it that way. I wasn't thinking of it as like an upside down cross, and like black eyeliner. That's not what I was actually thinking. I meant before Common Era. That's kind of what I meant. And actually, kind of embarrassingly, on my track sheets, I had someone make me a little logo or whatever, BC Studio, and a dinosaur with like a vocal mic. Really embarrassing. Terrible idea. But honestly, that is actually more of my sentiment and my general sense, which was a curiosity about, this planet without this invasive species of human beings that have redesigned the entire planet. But I gotta say, I think I had this youthful, like, I think maybe it's a quality of youth, of like identity, of really like trying to find like who you are, who are your people, where do you fit, and maybe that abates after a while. Once you start finding your own worth. So back then, when I was trying to find my own worth, I was digging and looking. Well, how am I valuable? And now I'm like, I got more to draw from. I'm much more concerned about my immediate community. I mean, I was then too, but I'm more concerned that my immediate community gives me more of a sense of being, of myself, than any kind of identity based on these, external factors. I mean, I think a lot of things don't technically matter, but I guess people need them. There's a lot of reasons I think people take on identity. Sometimes it's imposed. Sometimes they need to the solidarity or whatever. Sometimes they really need it. But a lot of the stuff is pretty superfluous. So really, ethnic identity is kind of maybe it's not as superfluous as some other things. Race is definitely superfluous. It doesn't even really exist. National identity is totally made up. And the most dangerous one of all. I mean, it didn't even exist before like the 18th century or 17th century. It was totally manufactured as a way to get people to march and to follow Napoleon into war and make the consensus easier. Well, you're French. I don't know. And yes, go on.
Yeah. So you mentioned part of what you were talking about there was this sense of affinity that you had for Native Americans. I was wondering because I'm just a white Westerner, so I never had any kind of ethnic prejudice against me growing up because everywhere I've lived has been predominantly white Anglo-Saxon, but I've moved around a lot in my life. I was originally from Australia. I went back and forth between Australia and Scotland, and then I've lived in different places as well. And I think one like kind of common thread through it is a lot of the time I've sounded to people like I'm English, but I'm actually not English. I don't have any English relatives. And I've lived in England very briefly, but I don't consider myself to be English at all. But I have an accent that kind of sounds English. So if there's any kind of stigma attached to me, it tends to be people like, oh, who's this posh English guy? It's like, I'm not English. But I'm wondering for you, coming from Argentinian parents, when you were growing up in the US, did you feel a certain sense of a stigma attached to you? Or were you in a more kind of multicultural environment where you didn't really feel that?
Well, it's definitely multicultural. Also, the world that my parents put me into. For instance, I grew up on the Upper East Side, and where I went, like during the summer, I went to the Y. I guess you guys have that's all over the world, right? I went to the Y, right?
The YMCA.
Yeah, except it was the YMHA.
What was the H for then? Oh, humanist.
Hebrew.
Oh, Hebrew. Okay.
So I went to the Young Men's Hebrew Association, YMHA. I mean, there was no. I think anyone can join. Totally, anyone can join. Just like with the YMCA, you don't have to be a Christian. But that's right. But it was very, very Jewish, and also Upper Manhattan. I mean, the Upper East Side. I mean, it's funny. There is a distinction. The Upper East Side is less Jewish than the Upper West Side. We were on the Upper East Side, but that's a big institution. Now they kind of call it the 92nd Street Y. Like if you talk to people in New York, the 92nd Street Y, they do a lot of. I'm always seeing like panels and films being shown. It's not just a Y. It's a kind of a real cultural institution, but very Jewish. And my parents' friends were Jewish. And then for high school, I went to a high school in the northern Bronx. I didn't even realize it right away, but years later, I realized, wow, so like everyone was Jewish. And it was really funny because I didn't even notice. And then my Jewish friend said, yeah, only you and Perez weren't Jewish. So that my best friend was this Puerto Rican guy, Mark Perez. And so I was like, yeah, okay, me and Perez. And I just didn't. So anyway, it was very multicultural. I did feel, but this is just the usual being embarrassed by the parents thing. But I did get embarrassed by my parents' very bourgeois culture. I mean, they were very Europhilic Argentinians. They sent me to French school. So my elementary school was the Lycée Français de New York. They could speak French, another colonial language. And so I went there by the same school that two of the Strokes went to.
Okay.
They also went to this school, if that gives you an indication what kind of school it was.
A little bit.
Yeah. Two of them did the same thing I did, went to elementary school, then went somewhere else for high school on the Upper East Side. They're younger than me, though. So I was embarrassed about that, so I felt I felt a little othered. And I think that that when you're a kid, you want to belong, and
Definitely.
that's a natural thing. So anything that othered me was a little, concerning. But that's the thing that was most. Here's the thing: is I was kind of wondering about it the other day because I have a lot of people that like classical music, and I have this aspect of myself that's so like anti-classical music, even though I have opera singers sometimes perform on my records.
I've noticed that. Yeah, but your mum was a concert pianist, is that right?
That's right. And then her aunt, so my great aunt, was also was an opera singer, and they were both managed by my grandmother, who was a music manager. So my mom was born in 1922. Her aunt, the great singer who sang with Caruso, I guess she was born in the late 1800s or mid 1800s even. So all this goes way back. But also this funny thing. So my mom was famous in Argentina, right? She was in a film. And I was thinking about the other day, there is a sort of difficulty that's added in your life or when you're a kid with a famous parent. That's kind of, some of her photos in the United States were taken by the same photographer that photographed Marilyn Monroe. So my mom was considered, her lawyer was Marilyn Monroe's lawyer. There was some people that were going to try to get her into film in the United States. And it was interesting with the Marilyn Monroe photographer who did the thing with took one of the photos of the skirt on the subway grate, was that Marilyn Monroe was sort of like, they called her at the time, girl next door, right? It was sort of like in a way plain, somewhat plain, like less glamour. And eventually she became glamorous, but that was the sell, kind of a beauty, but girl next door. And my mom was not that.
Was just wondering, like that notion of the beauty of the girl next door, do you think part of that was a sort of I don't know how conscious, but like a sort of marketing notion of like, this is achievable for the common person, like this is something you can aspire to?
It's hard for me to parse that culture then, now so much is it's very clearly women are part of the market, right? So that's why things even changed in a lot of culture. Was like there's a time when there was a niche of content. Sorry to use that word, film or whatever, that was for women. That was a niche, but generally like big broad culture was pretty male oriented. So what men wanted to see or cared about, and now that's different. Now, thankfully, it's different. So it's hard to parse. I mean, now someone on the level of Marilyn Monroe, we would have to ask, how is she relatable and appealing to women? And at the time, I don't know. So I don't know that time, but I do think of her as that. Well, she was 50s, 1950s.
Yeah.
So that was this era of a sort of uh, a very it's like the silent generation or something.
Yeah. I mean,
It's
I guess the
very,
notion of a woman as a consumer was like the consumer housewife, as opposed to a sort of emancipated individual.
yeah. And so the idea maybe that was a male fantasy of like the girl next door in your small town and she was the fantasy of beauty in that context.
Yep.
And so I think with my mom, they attempted this like exotic beauty thing.
So was she in the US at this point?
Yes. So she came to the US ahead of my dad. My dad was a doctor. Recently, since I found some tapes of my dad, because I found some tapes of my mom, and I'm like, oh, there's stuff of my dad's, and he was like, I don't know why, but there was like in bilinguals, like the whole thing would be in Spanish and the whole thing would be in English, and it was like panels and discussions or whatever, or just presentations. I didn't know what I was listening to. They were recorded of him like supporting the arts and trying to get more funding in American schools for the arts. So my dad was a doctor, but a big supporter of the arts. And you saw that in my household, listening to music. I was going to the Philharmonic and the Metropolitan Opera like weekly. We would get like season tickets and stuff. And my parents really wanted me to learn all that stuff. So my mom came to the U.S. Sometime, I guess, mid 50s or whatever. She was sort of blacklisted by the Perón government. So I don't quite remember the timeline, but I remember about that. Like during World War II, my mom was recoiled at the thought of Argentina being neutral or whatever in regards to Germany, the Third Reich. And she was, and that was bad perceptions of Argentina in that regard in the U.S. So I have photos of my dad playing to U.S. troops. And she also played, I recently found that there was a place in Times Square, right, the center of, well, practically in the center of New York City, where all the skyscrapers are and all that. In Times Square, there was, I think it was called the Canteen or something like that. There was a thing where American service members on leave, could go somewhere and there would be entertainment. And so a lot of musicians, whatever, performing artists would donate their time and play there, for the troops, basically on leave. So I was realizing my mom was doing that. There was press about my mom in the States that called her Argentina's goodwill ambassadress. So she was like from someone from Argentina, that was coming here and said, and as a representative, no, I'm with you in this fight against the Third Reich. And so my mom, interestingly enough, was always anti-fascist, which I like. So and then somehow I think my parents, my dad, then they met somewhere in like they met I think they married in 1950. So it was a little after the Second World War. They married in 1950, and I think at some point my mom got blacklisted, because of Perón, and there was a lot of because basically a lot of like sports and the way I understand it, a lot of sports and music stars had to support the regime, like with like clips. I mean, Perón, the shit was getting insane with the whole Evita like cult, and so my mom wasn't having any of that, and so basically she got basically blacklisted. So she came to the United States, sort of as a political refugee in a way, and my dad followed suit, and then my mom, it was interesting. She got into an accident on tour, and it's funny. It was like so similar. Wow, I've been on that same route. I've been New York to Boston in like a fucking like small van or little minibus cramped with people in bad weather. I've done that trip, and she was in like on tour with like a little thing with like a chamber group, and it slid off the road or something, and she was injured. And then that's when she decided to have a kid. So I was born pretty late to her. She was 40 when she had me, and so that prompted when she basically had to like stop touring. Basically, she had to stop touring for a little while she recovered, and so she had to decide to have a child at that point, and voila.
So when do you remember first becoming aware of being the child of a famous parent?
Well, it was kind of, kind of always there, you know. I mean, so there was a lot of stress about expectations. You know, they tried to also give me my family history. So like she would talk about her aunt being the opera singer and stuff, and then you know, see photos, you know, her playing at Carnegie Hall, and then also when she died, you know, my mom died in 1972. Oh,
Okay, so
73.
you were only like 11 or 12 at that point.
Yeah, I was 12. She died 1973. So yeah, I might be off by a year, but whatever. Basically 12 years old. Very, very, very tough. Because also my mom had been sick for a few years. That made it even worse. So so from when I was 9 to 12, when it would have been really good for me to know my mom, I didn't really know her because she was getting sick. She was in a coma for a little while. She just had to, by because of the disease, became distant. You know, she was in pain a lot of the time. You know, so it was bad, and so that also had an influence. You know, but yeah, so I was kind of, so when, you know, when she died and she crazy, the memorial was in the same memorial, the place where her wake was in the same building where, again with Marilyn Monroe, where the wake for Marilyn Monroe was on the Upper East Side, and then there was a memorial for her at St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan. It's really strange.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, so like, yeah, I mean, it just was this accepted thing. You know, also her struggles with it. I think that she was really blaming, because she really wanted to. Maybe that also influenced me. She started taking it after I was born. She didn't go back to that life. She went to music school. She'd never even been to school. She'd never been to because she was tutored her whole life, because her dad was a senator in Argentina. So my mom had led a cloistered life and was tutored all the time. And they immediately put her on a tour, and had playing professionally from like the age of 6. She was considered a child prodigy. So she was already touring, especially all over Latin America as a child. So she was really frustrated and angry that she hadn't had that she'd never gone to college, you know. So she went to music school and studied electronic composition. I think she had some collaboration with Pierre Boulez, who was this electronic person, or took a class with him or something. And then she also wanted to conduct. She was getting into like conducting. I actually saw a piece of hers where she was conducting all students and hippies in music school in, you know, the 60s. It was really incredible. And yeah, so I was aware of like maybe the dark side of having been like a child star, basically. And so I was kind of aware of that. Like she was basically, I need to reclaim my life, and that's what I'm going to do now.
With all of that background, both the awareness of your mum's trajectory, and then, you know, the sort of classical lineage in your family, I'm wondering for you, when you started out with OAO Studios and also getting into making music yourself, what was that like, sort of trying to carve out your own identity with that behind you? You know, how much was it sort of an inspiration, a foundation, versus something that you felt you had to sort of shed to have your own identity?
Well, there was definitely a lot of wanting to shed. You know, for instance, moving out of Manhattan, for instance, and even moving to Brooklyn, then into a war zone. That was kind of part of it. But really, when I got into started with music, I mean, I was in theater class in high school, and then I felt like somehow music was just calling me, right? Like I felt, oh, there's got to be some way, because I was enjoying theater class. I was enjoying doing the lighting, and I was enjoying set design. So I quite liked that. And I liked during the performance, so during the theater performance, we would be performing, and I liked controlling the environment. So maybe that's the thing that'll tell you something, right? Where I actually thought it was really cool to, you know, affect things. So okay, here I'm supposed to add some blue, maybe a little more blue. Maybe I should fade that out slower and add the pink, or, you know. So it's this kind of like painterly kind of impact on people's perception and stuff. Like I really did enjoy that. So somehow I felt like I wanted to go into into music. And then that's when I met Laswell, and he sort of said, well, maybe I can help with that. I mean, that was essentially the thing. So I think I just, the one thing that I think with my mom is that she dedicated her life to music. And so therefore I felt like it was coded in me that one could do that, and that was honorable. So at no point did I feel that dedicating my life to music was narcissistic, or selfish or a waste of time. It felt honorable because my mom, that led my mom's, her entire life was dedicated to music. Of course, that came from a very privileged place. In fact, also it comes from me from a privileged place. But yeah, so that's why the idea of like lifer and in it to do it really drove me. I'm not sure that I was really trying to buck my parents. The thing that I found with my early stuff, and that might explain the first few records, is I felt like doing something outside of. It's really kind of funny. It's I want to do stuff outside of the world I was recording. Weirdly enough, that's why those records were not like avant-garde, stuff like John Zorn oriented kind of stuff. They were not hardcore. They were not no wave.
Yeah.
There were none of these things. And so I was very conscious for some weird reason of and then maybe that was the infatuation with Native American topics, was I just wanted to find something in myself. I don't know why. It's funny because I totally changed my tune later on with the album Ex-Nihilo. So
Yeah.
Ex-Nihilo was funny because Ex-Nihilo is really chaotic and I think a bit of a difficult listen. But what's really funny is then, and also that sounds a little macabre, but I kind of felt that, potentially I was getting old. Who knows? And I thought that I should really finally do something that represented my life a little bit. And I realized the opposite of what I was feeling before, that to find myself, I could distance myself from what other people were doing and the scene I was recording. I was happy to be in the scene, but in terms of my own expression, I needed to be free of that. I didn't want to be doing another no wave record for myself, And then with Ex-Nihilo, I said, well, hold on a second. That all is me. And so for instance, like Swans, like very much when I was recording Swans, there was a few EPs I did, by the way. There was one thing called Sea in Tijuana. There was another thing called Dear Pappy, I'm in Jail. That's my usual going into humor for like an EP. So these other things, and that at the same time I'm doing Swans. I very specifically did not want to do something like Swans.
Yep.
Then I kind of realized, maybe I'm good at some things. Maybe that is me. Maybe there's something of me in there. And you know what? I maybe should make some material that captures that in my own way. So that was Ex-Nihilo, where I let it go. I let it be Swans. I let it be dark. I let it be no wave.
That's a really interesting insight because, like I say, listening through basically all the releases from Sirens of the Apocalypse onwards, I really enjoyed Sirens of the Apocalypse and I really enjoyed the Son of a Gun EP. One of the things that I felt with those two records was they were very playful, and also they were very eclectic in terms of the style that you had. Even sometimes within one track, you'd be jumping around all these different styles, and I think it worked. But I was thinking to myself, if I was going to try and describe your music based on those records, it would be extremely difficult because it's a kind of a kaleidoscope. And I felt that Ex-Nihilo in your catalog was the first point where I went, oh, there's kind of like a sound that I can identify. So it's interesting that you say that that's kind of chaotic and a difficult listen, perhaps. Because I actually thought when it starts, I thought whoa, I have to get myself into the mindset of this record. But as it progressed, I thought, once I'm in this world, I can recognize what it's all about. And I also thought as well, what was interesting to me is when we talked before, you talked about liking, I think not necessarily just with your own music, but you like to record music where there are a lot of different elements to it. It's like sonically, there's a lot going on. And that was the first record where I thought, this is maybe kind of what you were talking about there. It's like all the different vocal elements to it. And I thought maybe that's also the first record where you had the opera singing as well. And as I say, once I got into it, I thought I really, really like this. Like, I think it's one of my favorite records of yours ultimately, but it takes a kind of like a mental adjustment to get into it.
Yeah, well, it's funny because a couple of things you mentioned. It's funny, the other material, maybe I have in my current set, maybe there is a little bit of that kaleidoscope. That word has been used before. We find it using it again. I'm just saying, not to diminish your use of, or finding that word to describe something I do. But it's been said before, because I would kind of also part of with my live sets, there's always improvised segues. They always are contiguous sets. So what happens in between the songs? Who the fuck knows? So that already gives it a sense of like, oh man, now we're back to something that's more like catchy. And it just went from like something that was like, very, insane in some way. But yeah, the Ex-Nihilo, a lot of that was my wanting to capture what I'm essentially good at, and so I kind of, I produced myself, and I did the things that I feel like my ear was accustomed to. So basically it was sort of like, I wanted to join the movement of the sonic movement, that I was a part of, and that was kind of, that was very deliberate, But then of course it's followed by, I guess Son of a Gun followed that, but then of course it's followed by my life being, oh, but wait a second, I have these other ideas, and that's actually the usefulness of, I think, of EPs, the short format. Maybe you don't want to make it an oeuvre. And maybe you don't even want to say it's an oeuvre, but you want to say, this is also me, right? So that's why I was like, oh, okay, let me get back to this stuff, and maybe a short format, But
Yeah.
I wanted to maintain. So Ex-Nihilo really felt that was the word I might have even used then to explain what I meant, which was like it's life defining, and I was trying to like, capture like a whole thing. And yeah, but it is funny with that previous material where even within a song I would jump around. I think that was kind of the playfulness where I liked the occasional like obvious reference. Was just, it was something amusing about that. Like, even because you could think I've zero to do with Johnny Thunders, for instance, right? But there would be like a couple moments where I was like, oh, you know what? Just occasional, for sometimes even the way I deliver a line, with just one line, it's kind of Johnny Thunders. That's cool. So I would do these little things, and it's funny because I remember playing at a local bar here, and the Johnny Thunders thing, because I guess I like Johnny Thunders, and it came to mind where I delivered a line. I thought, wow, it's really that vibe of that kind of music, and I delivered a line vocally a lot like Johnny Thunders in this. It was an intimate thing. It was basically in a bar, a lot of people I knew around. And I thought, well, what was the value of my like kind of going Johnny Thunders for like maybe a couple of lyrics? And I thought, oh, it's interesting because it probably, with that reference point, put them in a state of that they recognize of hearing that kind of music, or like maybe puts them in a state emotionally even of how they feel like maybe when they listen to that kind of no generation, blank generation kind of like listening experience. And so so it was actually useful, not just as like an intellectual reference point, but it actually seemed like an interesting tool for like manipulating like the emotions of the listeners in a little bit, because I would take them away from this and suddenly they're like, oh, I feel like I'm at a Johnny Thunders type thing, and then you're not. So that was the value of it, of like these sort of like kind of referential things.
Yeah, well, that's also very interesting, because there were a couple of other moments where I noticed that kind of effect. I don't remember which release it was on. It might have been the Son of a Gun EP, yeah, I can't remember. But you had a line where it was something like "The lunatic is on the path," and I thought, hang on a minute, that sounds very familiar. Is that a Pink Floyd thing? And I couldn't remember which one it was, but I thought, I think that's a Pink Floyd reference. And I thought,
It was.
I thought it's definitely on purpose, but I thought that was interesting as well, the way it takes you into something else, for whatever reason. It was just interesting in itself, I thought.
Yeah, it might bring you back to a different age if you had, it might take you back to when you were younger or whatever. So it was interesting, and it took me to actually do that live to understand that it wasn't just, I mean, it's perfectly fine as sort of like these, like sort of an intellectual playfulness, but that it actually had some like emotional value, some perceptional and conscious value that someone's put in a different conscious state, because it puts them up when they were like listening to first discovered Pink Floyd, when they were a teenager. Poof, there you're like sort of swinging to that moment for a second. So yeah, there was that Pink Floyd moment. It's funny because it was really funny because there was this other band. Ah, fuck, I don't want to get it wrong. It might have been this band called Natural Disasters. It was a thing, and they were like, "So you didn't notice that that's like basically it's fucking Pink Floyd?" And I'm like, and I found it like, so I've been there, and it can happen. Happens to the best of us. Suddenly it's like, holy shit, that's Pink Floydy. And and they were like, oh no. They were like, absolutely not. They fucking ate up a lot of studio time. How are we going to do exactly the same thing? You know, maybe change a couple notes, but it's still the same thing, same tempo, same key, but it not be like the first thing you think about is Pink Floyd. So friggin' that I was like, and it was amusing to me because I thought I'd been there before. But it is kind of funny, these artists that really own a thing. Something I really quite respect, actually, that there's these artists, like that's why I like Carlos Santana, for instance, right? I like Carlos Santana because you're going to play blues guitar and there's going to be a Latin context. It's going to sound like Carlos Santana. Miles Davis, you're going to play trumpet. You're going to put effects on the trumpet. It's going to sound like Miles Davis. Like there's just no fucking way out of it. You know, like I even saw a Mark Rebo thing, which I liked. I think it was called Los Cubanos. Right? So he's playing like blues guitar over like, you know, Cuban stuff. It's like, it sounds like it's Carlos Santana. You know, it's like
Mark Rebo, he played with David Bowie for a while. Do I remember that correctly? Am I mixing him up? I'm pretty sure I know of him, and I think I've heard him interviewed too. What was the main band that he was in? Did he play with Elvis Costello as well, maybe?
Could be. He's played with a lot of people. Definitely a lot of John Zorn stuff. And what's that record called? Bone Machine?
Tom Waits.
Tom Waits. I think that's one of his main. I think that's the thing that put him in a lot of people's awareness was the Tom Waits Bone Machine record.
I love that record.
Are you seeing that? Am I wrong? Are you fact checking? Fact checking.
Tom Waits is mentioned for sure. John Zorn, as you said. I don't immediately see. Oh yeah, Elvis Costello. I don't see David Bowie. I might have been wrong about that, but Elvis Costello, yeah. So
yeah, David Bowie doesn't come to mind. I mean, but on the other hand, it's not like it would surprise me. Because David Bowie, during a certain era when he was working in New York City, did use a lot of like instrumental hot shots.
Yeah, like he had Robert Fripp and he had Stevie Ray Vaughan, and I'm sure there were other notable.
Laswell, Bill Laswell. I remember at the time he was a little annoyed because they didn't use him for, you know, put on your red shoes and dance or something like that. And so he played on that song, but then they didn't use his parts. But then he felt like that what the end result was a little similar to what he did. So he was part of the organic process of creating that recording, even though he's not on it and not credited, obviously. But yeah, so the idea that Rebo and being in New York, in the East Village would have, you know, it wouldn't have surprised me. But anyway, yeah, Rebo's. I mean, I love some of these artists that really make sure to keep a sort of political or community activism kind of alive in their music. I don't really expect everyone to do this, but when someone does, it's quite so. Even Bruce Springsteen, you know, like it's cool. He's cool. Bruce Springsteen is cool. Mark Rebo does that. He in my activist group, Voice of Gowanus, he participated in a fundraiser. With another group that's always like that, which is Yola Tango. Yep. So Yola Tango and Mark Rebo did a fundraiser for my activist group, which is fucking amazing. We raised a lot of money that was needed and immediately spent because we had a lot of fucking expenses hiring experts and all the kind of stuff we do, you know, in this neighborhood of Gowanus. But yeah, that's sort of like donating their time for politics. Anyway, I just wanted to get that little shout out with I think Rebo has there's like a page on his website or something. I think he came up with the word music activism or something. Mm-hmm. So that's been influential. Like this other band I work with, the Resistance Company. Okay. They've donated their time and performance and their bodies to supporting various social political movements. Like they'll play on the street at protests and stuff. You know, they bring like a small drum kit. They bring like battery powered amps, and they've done that with us in Gowanus for some of our local issues. So I've recorded them. So I really try to support a lot of. I think that's a part of it. I mean, interestingly enough, I should say that in my family, there was like my legacy family, like my mom's family, all that. There's a lot of politicians. It's really funny how I try to keep that lane open. So there was, like I said, my grandfather was a senator in Argentina. I had an uncle by marriage that worked with Allende, with the Allende government in Chile. So there was that lane that happened when my mom was alive. So there was a lot of politics, and so I remember a lot of people actively either in government or one of my aunts was friends with Che Guevara's mom. So so I don't know. So I've always kind of had that in there. I went to a soothsayer once. I went to someone that read my aura in when I was a teenager, and everyone was saying, "Oh, she is fucking incredible." And actually, it was kind of funny. She was saying, she said, she saw two lanes for me. I didn't tell her anything. She goes, "I see either music." She could have seen that with the music, because I was had a headband and long hair. She could have ascertained that visually. She goes, "I see two lanes that maybe you might have to pick one or the other, but I see politics and music." And it was funny. I'm like, "Oh yeah." I was like, "Okay, whatever. I don't believe this stuff anyway." And then even years later, even now, I'm like, "Wow, could that have been just right? Could that have been in my makeup?" Because she was she was a medium.
Yeah, I find that very fascinating. It's that whole sense of the esoteric. Now, Martin, I'm mindful of your time. I have potentially other questions, but generally when it gets to about an hour, I think I should let people go. You probably have other things that you need to go and do.
I mean, you probably should let me go, but if you actually have a few questions, I can try to be not as verbose.
Okay. I would like to ask you a few more questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I've been getting more and more interested in the notion of noise. The more and more that I'm sort of thinking about the music that I like, and thinking about, we talked a little bit before about different styles and genres and overlap and what things become sort of, mainstream or commercial and other things that don't. And I saw this clip of Napalm Death, and Barney, the singer, introduced that he was giving some spiel, and he mentioned we're a noise band from Birmingham. And I thought, I like the fact that he said we're a noise band. And I was thinking to myself that, so many styles of music that might start out underground or sort of counterculture, they can get co-opted into the mainstream. It's when you think of things which are metal at a certain point or in certain areas can be quite an abrasive countercultural notion. And then, metal can just become something which is okay, we're going to have some overdriven guitars and now it's in a pop song. R&B becomes very mainstream. Jazz can be totally mainstream. These things can have a certain kind of revolutionary aspect to them that can be smoothed out. But I feel like you can't do that with noise. Noise is by definition kind of disruption. So I wondered for you, maybe partly thinking about the sort of the no wave connection, do you think about, or what do you think about noise in relation to what you're interested in musically and what you do musically?
Well, also the idea of noise as a musical quality that's relatively recent for me, because I'm not sure that when did that really appear. There was other words for these things. For instance, a noise band or noise rock.
Yep.
That happened when people got tired of saying indie rock.
Yep.
And then things actually did get noisier. I mean, definitely the John Zorn zone was very exciting to me because it was deconstructing things. So there was some things that are familiar and they're being kind of destroyed. I am also pretty cognizant of the fact that it's hard to be completely original, right? There's only 12 goddamn notes, so to some extent it will tend to anchor on something. So you're deconstructing it or even deconstructing compositions. I mean, the first time I saw Zorn anything was I walked into a rehearsal of his, because I went to meet Bill Laswell in a building that just happened to have a rehearsal happening. And so I walked into the lobby of the building there to see Bill Laswell in 1978. And that just happened by coincidence for me in the afternoon to walk into a John Zorn rehearsal. So I was watching this shit of Eugene Chadbourne, the guitar player in that rehearsal playing a guitar with a balloon. I've mentioned this in a few interviews, but he playing the guitar with a balloon, and I was still in like guitar hero zone, listening to Jimi Hendrix and even the Sex Pistols were kind of like guitar heroes, and playing the guitar with a balloon just blew my mind. And also just feeling like, I'm just kind of aware of, I'm always, even sonically, I'm always looking for always something kind of unique. I need a bit of a sonic hook in every single thing. So when I'm working with a drummer and they go, I got this little gong. Great. So it's not the same as in every other goddamn drum kit. I worked with it's actually on some of this newest stuff, a bass player that works with me. He has a 5-string bass. Great. You mean an extra string? Beautiful. Just like friggin' anything, right? But I think also with the funny thing with noise, that might become sort of an issue because this topic has come up a bunch, which is something that is not learnable by AI. And how can you do it, right? So even the way you just described it there, because it's by definition disruption. And so I was like, that's interesting. Like it's almost like you led the topic of like, in terms of we're talking about things get co-opted. There's an arc of in genres, really, of like their infancy, their adolescence, their maturity, and their elderliness, right? So all these other things can be kind of analyzed. They can all be turned into a formula, which is really disappointing, and people are really existentially like recoiling at and bucking against. I mean, it's kind of fucking crucial, but it's demeaning. Aside from just the whole concept of theft, it's demeaning. Because all these genres to me are mini social movements. They fucking mean something. I'm actually into genres. So noise also, I think I mean, when I listen to 80s music, even 80s pop, there is this sort of like the ambiguous sound, I think is important. And you find it even in popular music. I listen to, I don't know, Flock of Seagulls, and I hear ambiguous sound. I hear like, oh, what is that? Is that a synth or something else? I think it's part of how our ears are. So, and when you don't have this stuff, people say it. Well, this it's stripped down, or it's pure, or it's underproduced, or it's less produced, or it's raw. All these kinds. So when you really don't have a lot of like ambiguous interconnecting fibers on the recording, it either way stands out, but it has an impact. So the lack of it also has an impact. And that's the zone that I think noise is in, so sometimes, I don't know, this band Ouija that I was kind of listening to, and it was funny because there's this person doing this local band, and one of the guitar players is doing this stuff, and it's noisy, and it's kind of fascinating because I can see the fingers, but then there's all this extra other stuff, and there's like feedbacks and notes, and this stuff's out of control, and that's super good. It has an emotional quality, right? It's like there's an immersiveness to it. So I think also immersiveness and noise, like that's why stuff that I was doing these little events. It was put together by my bandmate Genevieve Fernworthy. She was organizing these little events for a while called Lunaries. So around the full moon, we would invite people, and people would meditate and lay down, and we'd do sound baths. And it wasn't like noise, but it's kind of like noise, right? It's immersive. So that's that quality. So I hope I kind of address. But by the way, the arc of the infancy of a genre is really interesting, and usually the elderliness is academic acceptance.
Well, do you know what? I don't know how relevant it is, but it just popped into my head, which often makes me laugh. I'm a big fan of Ice-T. I think Ice-T is wonderful in that it's like there's a certain cartoonishness about him, which he recognizes and he kind of plays with, but he's also very well respected and very authentic at the same time. Mm-hmm. And a line that I've always loved is where in one of his tracks, he says, every fucking thing I write is going to be analyzed by somebody white. And I always thought, like, every time I want to critique, or like, not critique, but like think about what Ice-T is doing, I'm just like, here I am, a white guy doing like a thesis on Ice-T.
Oh my God. Wow. That's right. But it's funny because, I remember, I think these words flew out of my mouth in friggin' like 1982 or 1983 when I was working with Bambaataa, Fat Fight Freddy, these people, right? And we were talking like, I really believed it. I thought that was a lot to do with Black identity. I thought it was a civil rights issue. I mean, I thought there was also Black youth culture, which fascinated me. Like I thought, because it was novel back then. youth culture was still fairly new. I mean, we saw it a bit in the 60s. It sort of disappeared in the 70s. So youth, what is youth? The hardcore scene fascinated me. I loved it because I like collectivism generally. So I like the youth culture of hardcore, and I also like the youth culture I saw in the South Bronx, the sort of organizing and stuff. But it's funny because we was sort of talking to someone basically like it was revolution, right? So hip hop as revolution. There's nothing else then. It wasn't even a national genre at that point yet. It was maybe international, but it wasn't known, and it wasn't known in Middle America, let's just say, right? And I remember saying to someone, and I said something like that. I said, well, maybe one day it'll be, or guaranteed it'll be celebrated on the Champs-Élysées. That's what I said to someone. I actually said that. What I meant was that sort of academic acceptance, or it'll be analyzed by white people or something. But that's when things become elderly. So now we're seeing that. We're seeing that we didn't have that. We didn't have people that went to Berklee School of Music, with degrees in jazz. There you go. That's also the case, right? In no way bands, right?
Yeah.
You didn't have that. Back in that era, you would occasionally see someone that feel like they had formal training in music. You kind of go, oh, maybe that person, one, and never more than one person in the band, maybe one person in the band, and then some other band. So it's rare. Anyway, and
sort of moving things towards a conclusion and getting back particularly into your current iteration of the band and the latest record. You alluded, or you mentioned last time round, having different chapters of the band, and you also, I think it's mentioned on the Bandcamp that I've forgotten their names, but it was Diego Ferri and Oliver Rivera Drew.
Exactly, yes.
They play on the latest record. They're part of the European chapter. I wanted to ask you, how many different chapters of the Martin Bisi Band are there?
Well, right now there's 2 active ones, right? So I play shows here in regionally in New York City, and that's one chapter, and then there's the Berlin chapter. Actually, there's a few revolving members. There's sometimes 2 people that are happy, and sometimes people like that. Less commitment, but they're happy to jump in and they know the material. So Heather L., who was in the New York chapter, now moved to Berlin 2 months ago or 1 month ago. And so now she'll be in my European chapter when I play in Berlin. Looks like December at this point. Yeah, she'll play in that chapter. The other chapters were, and I think I'd like to get back to, it's just hard. These are harder places to tour and to get to. I have a chapter in the Northwest. So for instance, there's a drummer I like working with there. And there's someone else I like working with in the Bay Area, in San Francisco. So that person sometimes can go up to the Northwest. So in other words, I have a Northwestern chapter. And so that'll be Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Eugene, Oregon, maybe. The drummer from Portland doesn't go down to San Francisco, but in San Francisco for a while, I had another drummer that I worked with. So for a while, I was really calling it, with some overlaps, the Northwest chapter, the Bay Area chapter. And, LA is tough, so I wouldn't say I have a chapter there. So I guess for a minute there seemed to be, four chapters. And it really felt like they were all worth documenting. This would be completely different. The Bay Area person was, his name is Ethan. Forgetting his last name, whatever. He was in this band called Savage Republic, and he's very Neubot-y. So he plays bass, but then he'll also play like oil can. When he tours, he stops in a new town and goes to buy an oil can in a scrapyard. So that's the morning or any time he arrives in a new city. And then he hits it with hammers. So I was doing some stuff there with that element. So I played LA and I brought him from the Bay Area. And then there was him, and all of this requires one rehearsal. Sometimes only one rehearsal is possible. So that's where I really did start getting into this thing of including some improvisation. It just initially was out of necessity, which was, in one rehearsal, I can't expect anyone to learn more than 3 songs, for instance. But that doesn't make a whole set. So we're going to have to fill it out. And I would say, the rest is just going to be space jam or noise jam or whatever else you want to call it. We're just going to have to stretch out. And that would be actually a little bit of a hook for people, because they felt like they could, learn a few songs and then just maybe have a little more fun and maybe do stuff the way they would they would kind of normally do it. So it was interesting for people that were more in the experimental zone to do something with to play some songs, and people that normally just play songs to do something more experimental. So it all kind of works, and that also helped me develop. So it's on some of the last records you see both the Berlin chapter and the New York chapter. So the newest record, Dancing on the Power Lines, is the Berlin chapter. And it is kind of interesting that it was in Berlin that I had this realization of finally understanding radical joy. So so that's the Berlin chapter. And then in and the other one, Your Ultimate Urban Fantasy, the EP, that's basically the New York chapter.
Although it was funny because after last time when we talked a bit about this kind of, we talked about a certain atmosphere of New York City and about how there was something about Berlin that sort of like linked that tied them together in terms of the sort of atmosphere. And then when I was listening to Your Ultimate Urban Fantasy, it's like, oh, the first track is Manhattan Local Train. And then No Sun in Berlin Tempelhof. I was like, that's funny that just on that record, there's the reference to New York and to Berlin both together.
Well, that specific record, the Your Ultimate Urban Fantasy, was supposed to be about urban places. And so basically, it was the No Sun in Berlin Tempelhof was supposed to, slightly poke at a sort of Berlin lifestyle. Because every time I'm there, I feel it's slow. I like it. It's slower. There's something about it has the vortex of New York City, but it's a bit slower. It's a bit mellower. There's a little more fun. People are a little less like here. No one has any time. Everyone has 7 jobs. It's a little easier on that front, it seems, in Berlin. So that's the song pokes at that, and that's interestingly enough, with the U.S. basically the New York City chapter on that song. It's kind of funny, but each song, actually, the Berlin chapter is represented on the one song, which is because back then it only occurred to me lately that each record maybe is more New York and maybe another record is more Berlin. It just occurred to me recently, but back then I was like, fuck, I gotta get a little bit of the Berlin people, and that's the Berlin song is Transit Hub Extraordinaire. So on Your Ultimate Urban Fantasy, the song Transit Hub Extraordinaire, which has a video that's worth watching because it's crazy. That one's Berlin. That was recorded. That's the one that was actually recorded in the practice space. Took a bit of a job to mix it, but that one was recorded in the practice space in Berlin. And that the idea for that came on tour in Germany when we were in Cologne. And I was like, I had 4 songs. And I was like, fuck. And one of the songs on that EP is actually the one that's called Retaking Williamsburg, right? Which is basically trying to like gentrify Williamsburg. It was taken from a show in Williamsburg where I edited, and I had a multi-track recording. I edited out all the songs and then stitched together all the improv segues, which came to pretty much exactly 12 minutes, something like that. So it's a long song, but I thought that was kind of funny. So that's 4th song. And I was like, so that song's about Williamsburg. And so I said, well, I need another urban space. I want it to be an EP. We're missing one song. And so I was telling the people in the Berlin chapter when we were touring, and I was like, really, please, you see some urban environment that you think could be a song, let's do it. And then we're in a fucking train station in Cologne during their like Rheinfest, first day of Rheinfest, which is like insanity, where people are like, it's almost like St. Patrick's Day meets Mardi Gras or something, right? Insane in the train station. And then I'm like, yo,
this is it.
I think we got our song. And of course I referenced Kraftwerk, and they were like, huh? This is a song? What? And I'm like, hey, Kraftwerk can write a song about like riding on a train. We can write a song about a train station.
Absolutely.
The gears, the mechanism, people marching in unity, the controlled chaos, right? The one moment where people can just normally get arrested, right? Or it'd be socially taboo, but you can do all kinds of inappropriate shit, get drunk, and no one looks the other way because it's Rheinfest. Anyway, there you go.
No, that's a great insight. Before I let you go, in terms of the album and any shows that you've got coming up with whatever chapters in whatever parts of the world, is there anything else that you'd like to mention for the coming weeks and the months around Martin Bisi and your music?
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that this is a very special year. I mean, I hope it's a special year, but it guides me to think of it as a special year, which is the 45th year of the recording studio. So there was the original documentary Sound and Chaos of the studio is 15 years old, almost 15 years old. So we did a documentary short. The same directors did it's being edited now. A few more little things, but it's almost done. And it basically, the idea was not to recap a whole bunch of stuff or recap the intervening years between the first original documentary, but to maybe where the studio is now, particularly last year. People have finished records, full records in my place, and talk about some of the changes that are happening now. Some of the music is quite positive, I think, in terms of bands coming back and people being interested in bands and all this kind of post-pandemic stuff. It's good. So there's what's going to be coming up are shows that combine a screening of the new short with a performance. So that's
Cool.
what I'm working on now. There will easily be in New York, 2 of those. One definitely in Gowanus, so in some crazy ass building that's near here, and then more of like a venue that I'm used to playing at in Ridgewood, Queens, part of New York. So there'll be basically showing that documentary. So and then Q&A with that. Going to do the same thing in Berlin also. So there's a show. I don't want to mention it because I'm not sure it's 100%, but looks like that'll probably be in December. And then I'll combine that with the record, since the new record, Dancing on the Power Line, just basically the Berlin chapter. It'll be a record release there, but that record also in Berlin. So so the new record, and then this, very importantly, this documentary, because it also brings together a lot of bands. So there's like various bands and musical projects that are pretty disparate, but all have some common threads in it, like Genres Death, Voyeur, Weeping Icon, ongoing stuff with Live Skull members. There's also this cast album that was recorded in locally, the Fish Queen of the Gowanus Canal, which is part of like my thing of supporting activist music, because it's all activist. It's all like, I mean, it's very playful, but an underlying wrath, basically happy zone for me. And that's very Gowanus specific. So there in the documentary, and then also talk about the changing neighborhood, because these directors are not trying to make it just about music. It's also, what's funny is the original documentary and this follow-up, not really about me. Love that. You'll notice that my name probably, I don't think they've titled the documentary update short yet. Probably won't have my name in it. That's wonderful. So it's about space, it's about places, it's about a neighborhood, it's about a city.
Cool. That all sounds excellent. Well, Martin, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun to talk with you again. So,
of course. Thank you, Tom. And thanks to all you that are watching this. I see you.
Awesome. Until next time. Cheers, Martin.
Okay. Till next time. Bye.